Can God turn a blind side into a blessing and our pain into a renewed sense of purpose and mission? Yes, he can. And we'll explain how it all played out in one pastor's life in this episode of the More Than a Pastor Show. Let's get started. Hey, what's up, my friend? Welcome to the More Than a Pastor Show. I'm Rich Avery, your host. This is the show where we help pastors, missionaries, and other ministry leaders grow your income and build financial security. We'll help you take your skills, experience, and ministry know-how and leverage them into sustainable income streams outside the church through a business or a side hustle that's right for you, so you can serve God and provide for your family no matter what. Hey, thanks for joining me today. It's really good to see you. If you're new to the show, you can learn more about me, get the show notes for today's episode, and download some free resources to help you grow your income and build financial security. It's all over at my website, morethanapastor.com/52 for episode 52. Have you noticed in your own life, or maybe in someone else's life, how it often takes something bad happening to us, like losing our job, to finally launch us into pursuing a vision that God had given us some time before, but we didn't have the courage to pursue it yet? Maybe we kept thinking the time wasn't right, or we didn't have enough money, or we wanted to wait for other conditions to be just right before we really launched into and pursued this thing we knew God was calling us to do. But then all of a sudden, something major happens, and the things that had been holding us back suddenly seem to fade away, and they're no longer as important to us. I know that's happened in my own life, and that's exactly what happened to our guest today, Tom Bump. And I'm excited to have Tom here on the show to share his story about how a blind side in his church launched him on a mission to help pastors through the hard seasons of life and ministry. But before we get into the conversation with Tom, how's about you and I have a conversation for just a minute? What if next week you got blindsided and you were let go by your church? Do you know what you would do to provide for your family? Or what if your church has to make some serious financial cutbacks and your position has to be reduced? Maybe you've been full-time and now it needs to be part-time. Or what if you've had a vision for another type of business or ministry that you've been wanting to pursue alongside your role at the church, or maybe sometime in the future, but you've just never been sure how to get it started or if it's even right for you? Well, what if you had someone you could talk to about your hopes and fears or your dreams, a safe place where you could ask questions and find some clarity from another pastor who's been there, who understands what you're going through because they've been there themselves, and who can help you find the clarity and courage you need to take your next step? If that sounds like it's something that's right for you right now, why don't you apply for one of my free coaching sessions? You can learn more at morethanapastor.com/coaching. I'm so glad to have Tom Bump on the show today. I got to know Tom over the last few years through the Market Your Message community hosted by our friend Jonathan Milligan. When I first met Tom, I was thrilled to learn that Tom was not only a fellow pastor, but he's also a Michigan Wolverines fan, go blue, and a message-based entrepreneur who's on a mission to serve other pastors. Tom is the founder of Restoring Leaders, a ministry that offers individualized mentoring and group retreats to help hurting, overwhelmed, and burnt-out leaders live restored and lead renewed. He's also the author of Valley Over Mountains, a guide through the hard seasons, where he shares his experiences of going through hard seasons in his own life and ministry, or through those valley points in life, and how God used those things to prepare him for the next mountaintop experiences. Tom is the host of the Kids Ministry Collective podcast, and through his KMC coaching, he helps churches develop their family ministries strategies and helps them grow their teams. Tom speaks nationally at ministry conferences, camps, and training programs. And if you're ready to book your next family vacation or even a missions trip, Tom is also a travel agent. What does he do in his spare time? I don't know. You'll find Tom online at tombump.com. And now let's get into our conversation with Tom Bump. Well, Tom Bump, welcome to the More Than a Pastor show.
Hey, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me, man.
Oh, well, when I first connected with you through Jonathan Milligan's Market Your Message community a few years ago, I discovered that you had been a pastor and then you were involved in several different enterprises. And I thought, that's a person I really want to get to know at some point and really ought to have you on my show. So I'm grateful that now we're finally able to connect and have this time together. And so I would just love to have you share a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, well, with a name like Bump, I'm sure that created some curiosity, right? And people always say, how do you spell that? I'm like the road sign. I have welcome signs everywhere I go. They're big and yellow. The state pays for them. It's great. I actually have one that's on the other side of the camera that I didn't steal. A church gave it to me as a parting gift. Awesome. But anyway, so I live in Northeast Ohio, a little town called Worcester. People always say Wooster, and that's how apparently the locals know you're not from the area because you say woo instead of wuh. So it's Worcester. It's about an hour south of Cleveland, hour and a half north of what I call the Pit of Despair, because I'm a Michigan fan. And
go
so
blue.
I got my mug.
Nice,
this
perfect.
morning, so I'm good. But yeah, I'm a missionary to the dark territory, as I say. So anyway, but yeah, I'm a husband and a father of 4 young adult kids, and I've been in ministry pretty much all my life. My dad was a pastor, so I grew up around the church. I always say second row, right hand side. And that was where my mom could grab a hold of the back of my hair and give me a tug if I was misbehaving, or my dad could give me that look while he was preaching. And so, but I grew up around the church and actually loved it. Even though my dad went through a lot of hard stuff, we pastored in some small churches, small communities, and sometimes those can be very, very challenging. But nothing ever really pushed me in the other direction. I'm thankful God kind of protected my life, and even though I saw a lot of bad stuff on the one side, I saw a lot of great stuff on the other. And so I got into ministry at a young age. My family had me involved from the start, but I really got involved in children's ministry and student ministry while I was really still a kid myself, and that's really what God used to bring me full circle into being a full-time pastor. But I've worked in some real small churches, like 40, 50 people, and I've worked for a multi-site that was like 5,000 plus. So just kind of all over. But I've spent a lot of my years in family ministry, so with children and students, sometimes doing both at the same time.
Wow.
Did some senior pastoring for a while as well. Been an associate pastor, been a janitor, bus driver. Well, not bus driver, van driver. You name it. Been around the church a long time. But so the bulk of my world has been in that family ministry realm, and I've loved doing it. And now I get to serve pastors. I'm what I call a pastor to pastors.
Okay.
And I'm a leadership coach, and I help churches with their family ministry strategies, those kind of things. I do camp speaking. I'm a travel agent. And now I've launched a mission for hurting, overwhelmed, and burned out leaders called Restoring Leaders, where I walk with leaders going through the hard seasons, and we help them live restored and lead renewed, is what we want to do. So that's me in a nutshell.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. You've had a fascinating background with so many different experiences, long tenure in ministry in many different aspects. And then it sounds like from that, some other things have flowed, the travel agent work and then being a speaker, doing leadership, coaching, and then the restoring leaders. All of that just kind of flows out of who you are. I'd love to know, can you take us to a point where you felt like you were more than a pastor? Like, as great as being in ministry is, you felt called to something different. And how does that link to what you're doing today and these other things?
Yeah. This may sound jolting to some people, but really where I realized that I'm going to need to be more than a pastor was the first time that I got blindsided and let go as a staff person. I didn't see it coming. It was hard. I had a very young family, and all of a sudden now I'm like, okay, I am not a pastor. I have got to be a dad and a husband, and I've got to take care of my family. And I need a trade. I need to know how to do something. And so I found a guy who had a small painting and carpet cleaning company, and I applied and I learned how to be a painter. I learned how to do it and do it fast, because that was the key to the job. Was you're going to do it neat. You're going to do it. You're slow is fast. Really, when you're painting, you're deliberate, but you're moving, because the jobs, you want to get it done as quick as you can, and you don't want a lot of cleanup, and you don't want to go back and touch up. So you got to do it and do it right. And I learned how to do that. And then I learned carpet cleaning. And so I learned how to clean carpets and furniture and all that kind of stuff. And that became a fallback for me in many things. But I realized at that point, I needed to start thinking about, what else am I good at? What else can I develop inside of me, so that if I have those transition seasons, or if something like that were to ever happen again, which I prayed it didn't, but it did, that I was going to have to do that. And then really about 5 years ago, I sensed that God wanted to move me outside of the church and to come alongside the church. And I actually ran from it. I had a Jonah season where I ran from this vision and dream of doing something, of becoming a pastor to pastors, because that manly American mentality of I have to be the provider, which is biblically incorrect. God says he will provide our needs. So he had to do an adjustment there in my head. But I had this mentality that I had to be the provider. And I'm looking at this mission of serving hurting and burned out and overwhelmed leaders and doing leadership coaching and consulting. And I'm going, who's going to pay to do that? Most churches will just struggle through it, or do it, or you're going to go to a big named firm. You're not going to find some guy named Bump, even though I've got experience and I've built stuff like this and had good success and blessing from God in this. Who's going to pay me to do this? And so I'm like, okay, God, I know you're telling me to do this, but I'm going to go do this. And I thought I ran into a dream job, turned out to be an absolute nightmare. It really was a Jonah season. I was in the belly of the fish. I found myself in a place that I didn't fit. And all of the things that I thought were so attractive to me, God just stripped away. I had 3 leaders who were responsible for bringing and recruiting me. All of them left the church.
Wow, what a season.
And the whole strategy changed. And so everything that I thought I was walking into, where I could use my gifts and talents, was all I was told, don't do that. And I knew I couldn't stay. And so at that point, I started going, okay, I've got to do more. I've got to get this ready. I've got to get this hurting leaders thing, as I called it at the time, outlined and ready. And I got to get a website and all that. And I just kept saying, God, give me some time. Let me use what I'm doing. I'll endure whatever I have to endure, but let me get this ready. And God was like, no, we're going to do this now. And I got let go because a new hire came in and he didn't like me, told me as much in a meeting, said, I don't like you.
In the name of Jesus, of course, he told you that.
Yes. He's like, I don't like you and we're going to let you go. And it hurt. It was a little sour, but it was also exactly what I needed, because literally I walked out of the meeting with basically a paper telling me, here's your money and bye. Do not pass go, don't talk, just go. One of those things. And I got in the truck and I called my wife and said, okay, I'm done. Which there's a whole story to that one, but it's kind of funny. I actually knew it was coming. It was weird. I even texted her, said, I'm going to get fired at 2:30 today.
Oh my goodness.
And so I called her at 2:45 and said, okay, I'm done. And she's like, her first words to me were, are you done running?
Oh,
And I'm like, yes, ma'am, I'm done. And she's like, all right, let's get this thing started.
wow.
Um, let's get on mission. And within a few days, all of a sudden I had 8 coaching clients to do leadership coaching with. I actually had a pastor call me and say, hey, my children's pastor is struggling. I just happened across a website, your website, and saw that you do this. And he hired me on the phone and said, I want you to work with my leader. And so all of a sudden my plate was full. God was providing funds. And I learned that, you know what, being more than a pastor isn't so bad. It's actually kind of exciting. It's terrifying. It's hard, but it's one of the most exciting things I've ever done in my life. And I know I am doing and I am where I belong right now.
Hmm. Hmm. Wow. Such an experience. And you've been through some hurts, some pain, some bumps along the road, if I could
there you go.
if I could say. You probably never heard that before.
Just a few times. I would be rich if I had more.
There you go. Nicely done. Well played. and so it's from those experiences then that God is birthing something new and has given you a different calling. And I find sometimes some pastors or some churches feel like, Tom left the ministry to go do something else. Like, because they left the church world, they left the ministry. And so what do you say to people like that? Or have you felt that yourself? Or is this just a different phase of ministry for you?
My own mother. My own mother said, so when are you going back into the church? When are you going to go back being a pastor? And I'm like, I've not left. My vocation title has changed. And I said, honestly, what I feel like is before I was an addition table, I was serving one place, one group, one community, where I feel like now I have the opportunity to be a multiplication table. God has opened doors for me. I do a lot of speaking now. I get to go do kids camps. I do volunteer trainings. Like I say, I come into churches and help them with looking at, I'll walk into their church as a total stranger and I'll tell you how friendly you are. I'll tell you how your security works. I'll tell you if your building smells like dirty diapers or it's musty, or, I do those kind of things for people because I want to help their church. I want to help them figure that out. So what I really feel I have been called to, I didn't leave ministry. I'm actually doing probably more ministry now than I've ever done because now I get to run alongside the church. Yeah. And like I say, I've given myself the title of being a pastor to pastor. There are pastors who need someone. They need someone to walk with them and to pastor their soul and encourage them and give them a safe place to talk and to vent and to, I have leaders who have my number, who will call me and say, I just need to vent today. And I'll be like, okay, I'm going to shut everything down. I'm going to listen. I'll grunt so I'm hearing you. And at the end, if you want me to pray for you, just say, pray for me. Or if you want input, I'll give you some input and feedback and pushback. If you're done and you don't want anything, just hang up. And I get to serve pastors and I get to help them do what God has put them into and called them into. But God has called me to this. I would honestly, like I said, I ran from this. This wasn't something that I chose. God chose it for me. I truly believe that with all my heart. I've never seen something so clear in my life. And so, when people say, well, are you ever going to go back and be a real pastor again? I'm like, look, I am. I get to pastor pastors. I get to shepherd them. I get to help encourage them so they can be at their very best, so they can stay. Now, if God changes that assignment, I'm there. I'm his. I answered the call to serve him and to preach the gospel wherever he told me to. That's my call. That calling doesn't change. My vocation title has changed. The description, his job description's changed a little over the years. But I volunteer. I serve a children's pastor. I'm being the volunteer that I always wished I had.
Oh, how about that?
So I'm one of those guys that shows up to my children's pastor, says, I'm here. Do you need me? And he'll tell me yes or no. Sometimes he'll schedule me. Like this month, when we're recording, I'm on the schedule for 3 Sundays. and that way he can get away. He can go. They're starting a new site, and so he needs to go up to that new site. Well, he leaves me because he knows I can handle the room. He's
Nice.
got nothing to worry about, and I'm a mini me for him. Uh, so yeah, that's how I look at it. My job description, my title has changed. My calling has never wavered. And so who I am and what I do. And I think a lot of pastors, they may struggle with that, but like I said, now it's sad when I see so many leaders, and that's part of why my mission is what it is, because I'm tired of watching leaders get hurt and broken and worn out and overwhelmed that they just quit altogether.
Yes.
And they walk away from everything. I would rather see them get healthy and do what your mission is, of be bivocational, lead a church and then have a business that supports your ministry. And I had a friend of mine who he did house flipping, him and his family, and he didn't take a salary from the church. All his salary went to missions. And that was brilliant. And he was doing that years ago. He was way ahead of the curve, man. And had I had any interest in that, I would have been, hey, teach me to do that. I would like to know. I have another pastor friend who is a realtor, and he does real estate on the side and supports his family so that he doesn't have, because his church is small, and so that provides the income so that the church can actually hire other staff, and they don't have to worry about him, because he's making his income that way. And I think that's fabulous, because it allows him to be even a better pastor, because honestly, he gets to share his faith and share Christ and invite people to his church as he's selling them a house. I told him, that's a brilliant way to do it.
It really is. It really is. It's taking the gospel wherever you go and whatever context you're in, and it's not always inside the walls of the church.
That's right.
And with our pastor hat on, but there's other opportunities the Lord gives us. That's for sure.
Yeah.
What are you seeing right now with the children or student pastors you're working with, or with restoring leaders? I always wonder about what are pastors feeling right now in terms of finances? Like, how are their churches doing financially, and what kind of financial struggles are pastors feeling right now, and that may lead them to think about, maybe I need to start a business or a side hustle to supplement or replace my income, perhaps. So what are you seeing right now in our economy today, and with the pastors you're working with?
Well, the pandemic has what I say a lot is it has shifted and it has sifted. It has shifted the way we're doing ministry today, and it has sifted the church. And so you have a lot of downsizing in some ways. There have been a lot of leaders in the children's and family area that have lost their positions because of financial cutbacks. And then somewhere, I can't remember who did the research recently, but they confirmed that the average size church here in America is less than 300. Okay. That's the majority. And so a lot of those pastors are either making less now, obviously, even with inflation, but just because offerings, can be maybe stagnant, although I'm hearing some are coming back. So it's getting a little better, but it's still hard. And so, I think there's a lot. It's raised the stress level for a lot of pastors, and it does have them asking, do I need to have something on the side to take care of my family, so that there's stress for the church? Because most of us as shepherds, we don't want to burden the church. We don't want to, take too much from. And so, I was one of those pastors that very rarely negotiated my salary.
Sure.
I'm old school. I really did trust God for that, even though I struggled with it later with that part. Very rarely did I ever negotiate. If a church said, this is what we have to offer, that's what I took. I didn't sit there and go, nope, I'm worth more. I've got a master's degree, which, I have. And now I've got 35 years experience. But I went to one of the biggest churches I ever worked for, and I took almost a $15,000 pay cut.
Wow.
Which most people are you nuts? I'm like, yes, I'm the worst businessman in the world, I suppose. But I was following what I thought was the right thing to do.
Sure.
So yeah, I think what pastors might be feeling that are listening is that they are struggling internally, and they're trying to figure out, well, will that make me less of a pastor if I do a business on the side? No. Quite honestly, I think if you go into the approach that this is a kingdom business, and you're truly asking God to provide, then the mentality is again, how do I use this to build the kingdom? And like my friend, who every house appointment, he's eventually going to say, hey, if you're ever looking for a church home in our community, by the way, I'm a pastor, and I'd love to have you come visit my church. And he knows, he's careful. He doesn't shove it in somebody's face.
Sure.
But he's very good at just inviting people to come and let people know that he's there to serve them.
That's great.
And so, yeah, I feel like with today's economy and the struggles that there's out there is a stress level that's a lot higher. There's a lot of pastors struggling with, do I take something on? Do I not take something on? But I really do feel like it's wise for a pastor to always, have something there. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah. I think for some pastors they have to have a mindset shift to be able to think that way. Maybe you could speak to that. Have you seen some of that in terms of what the model should be versus what it could be? Maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, for me, one of the biggest struggles I had, and I think a lot of leaders struggle with this, is their identity in Christ. And they've tied in what they do with who they are. And so their identity is their vocation, and their vocation is their identity. And they've twisted them. I actually got to do a breakout at a conference recently where I talked about this, because I watched even my own father struggle with, he's 80 some years old, and he's always been a pastor. He's always been a child evangelist. And now, he knows he needs to physically slow down, but he doesn't want to. And he's continued, even though he's not in a formal ministry, he actually started his own because he didn't know how to stop. And I started watching this, and why some of it is okay and it's good, and I'm glad he's doing it. On the other hand, I've also been concerned that that's all he knows is how to be a pastor. And that's who he is. His vocation and his identity have become so twisted.
Yeah.
And so what I've tried to do for myself, and what I think a lot of leaders need to do, is realize that my vocation is what I do. My identity is who God says I am. And the calling that he's placed on me. So my identity is really who I believe God has created me to be, how he's wired me, how he's made me, and what he's called me to do. And then the vocation is my job. It's my job description.
Yeah.
But it's not who I am. And so that's why, when people, say, well, this restoring leaders thing, and you're KMC coaching, and so are you a pastor? Well, yes, I am. But I am first a child of God. I am first a husband and a father. That's my first ministry. And then my job description now is I serve leaders. I'm a pastor to pastors. I help leaders live restored and lead renewed. And so I think the mindset of I can do something else and still fulfill my calling and still be a child of God. You gotta drill down into that. But I think every leader needs to, and spend some time thinking that through, because once you realize that the vocation is going to change, it's just like we always say as pastors, the message never changes, but the methods do.
That's right.
Well, your identity is never going to change. But your vocation, how you do what you do, is going to change.
Yeah.
And so I think leaders have got to get that mindset. And I also think there's also a poverty mindset that hits a lot of us. We're used to doing less. with less, or actually more with less. There we go. I'll say it the right way. I got tongue twisted there. We do more with less. I mean, children's pastors, student pastors are great at taking, little and doing a lot with. It's amazing some of the budgets I was given and pulled off some things that would blow people's minds, and it's like, how did you do that? Well, a lot of creativity and ingenuity and a lot of asking and begging and pleading and repurposing. It's amazing what you can build out of cardboard.
And duct tape.
Cardboard, duct tape, and paint. Every furniture and appliance store knew me by name because I would come around looking for refrigerator
Here comes
boxes.
Pastor Tom again.
Yep, he's building. Then I found a box making company, and I could get whole sheets, which was just changing my world.
Wow.
But anyway, this poverty mindset is this whole thing of, well, I really shouldn't be making too much money. I shouldn't be. And I grew up with that. And my father will even admit this part, that he gave that to me. And I would be very, it was terrible at times. And I've had to battle this even today. I still battle this. I am worthy of God's provision. God is a God of abundance, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I used to say, no, I'll just, whatever God gives me, I'll take.
Yeah.
I'm just, and I think leaders, if, have got to break free from that, because you know what? It takes nickels to get noses. It takes profit to fuel passion. And I'm finally getting it through my skull that it's okay to make the profits, because I can give more, I can do more, I can build the kingdom even in a greater way. I can help people. And if I sit there and just say, well, okay, God, I'll just sit here with my hands out and you drop it. I don't think that's what God was talking about. When he, I don't see that as a biblical principle. I think God says, I'm the God of abundance, but you're going to have to go do it. You're going to have to get out there. When Jesus was feeding the 5,000, the disciples said, hey, they're hungry. And Jesus is like, you feed them. I was like, we don't have enough money. Poverty, right? Yeah. And Jesus is like, what do you have? Well, we got this little kid's Lunchable. And what did Jesus do? He made that little Lunchable an abundant meal with 12 baskets left over. And I see that as, look, God's given us skills and talents and abilities and things that we can do, as a business, as a quote unquote side hustle that can produce an abundance that we can do greater kingdom work. Like I said, my friend that flipped houses, he flipped them and he did that so well with him and his family that he didn't take a salary so that he could support 10 missionaries. With that salary.
So wonderful. Yeah.
So if he had had the poverty mindset, if he had still struggled with that, then there's 10 missionaries that would still be struggling to get to the mission field, but he could help fully fund people because of doing this extra thing. And so I think leaders have got to say, okay, God, how big do you want me to be? How do you open the doors and I'm going to walk through them.
Wow.
You set this up, I'm going to do it. Yeah. And so, that's, I hope that answers the question.
You have touched on so many things there, and I feel like, wow, Tom is preaching my message right here. This is fantastic. So, it's great to have a kindred spirit and to have you share out of your experiences and what has led you to becoming more than a pastor. And I think one of the last things maybe you shared was, about the feeding of the 5,000, where Jesus said, well, what do you have? And I think sometimes when we think about creating extra income or doing something different to provide for our family, we look at what someone else is doing and we say, oh, I want to go and do that. But that may not be right for us. Right. And I believe God has already put certain gifts, talents, skills, abilities within us. So it's not like we have to go and become Elon Musk and launch a rocket company if that's not our skill set. But what are the skills? What are the things that God has already put in us? And so I say, what are your skills you've developed in ministry? How can you leverage those into the marketplace through your own business? So maybe speak a little bit more about that.
Well, that's it. I often wondered, why, God, did you let me go through such hard seasons? I served in some places where, unfortunately, we saw the ugly side of the church come out. And I went through some really deep, dark places. I walked in a valley. In fact, so much I actually wrote a book about it.
How about
called
that?
Valleys
Over
Mountains.
Mountains.
Yep, a
Yeah.
guide through the hard seasons. I literally wrote this simple little book. It's very small. It's nothing super profound. I'm not a big writer. I'm a talker. This was a journey of love for me, but I wrote this literally because I saw that God had taken me through all of these things, and I started to see the reasons. And as God put the calling on my life to serve other leaders through leadership coaching and through restoring leaders, God took me through a restoration process where I refocused my mind. I started to renew the heart and realize my calling and my vocation were separate. And then that restoration process started of saying, okay, now this next season, I want you to do this. And all of that preparation. And I look back now and go, okay, I learned this and I learned that. I learned how to do this. I learned how not to do that. And I took all those things and said, okay, now I can serve other people with this. Because when I started looking for places, when I was going through my worst, I started searching for help. I needed somebody. And everywhere I turned, it was, I'll help you, but it's going to cost you $3,000. It's going to cost you $10,000. You can come to my retreat, but it's going to be X. And I'm like, I don't have that money. I got to take care of my family right now. I'm not going to spend that on me.
Yeah.
And so I went the hard way. And I see you're wearing a mountain shirt. Mountains for me are very passionate, very close. That's why the mountains are on my book.
Yes, perfect.
I've been out to
Yosemite. I got my Levi's mountains.
Yes. Well, it's beautiful. Even the colors match my book.
That's I know. Cool. How about that?
Look at that. You're branding for me. You're awesome.
If people are listening to the podcast, they'll have to go and find the YouTube video.
Yes, find the video. Yes, because I just held up the book and you got to see the shirt Rich is wearing. But I went out to Yosemite for about 5 different times with other ministry leaders on a retreat. And that's where God really clarified this for me. And really started to give me the vision for restoring leaders. But it was one of these things where as I was going through the hard stuff and as I was walking through this, I really started to see how God said, I want you to use this to help other people, because like I said, everywhere I went, everybody was charging exorbitant amounts. For restoring leaders, when I'm coaching a leader, I tell them, look, I'm not asking anything from you. And like I said, I'm the worst businessman in the world. So maybe this is the part some people don't want to really listen to for building businesses. Rich is going to have business coaching for Tom later. But I literally said, I feel so committed that if somebody has gotten let go of their job or they've left a church in a painful situation, I'm not going to ask any money from them. Down the road, if they want to donate back, they're going to pay it forward for somebody else. So I'm a pure donation-based ministry right now.
Okay.
I do offer courses and trainings that I charge fees for, and all that 100% goes back into the ministry. That's also why I'm a travel agent, because my travel agency, where I make my commissions and help people book family travel, that money helps my family and sustains what I do. And so, it's one of those things that everybody has talents and skills. For a while, I did a painting business because I had those skills and I used them for a purpose. I have friends that are great at website design. They just have a knack for it. It's just their thing, and graphics. And so they've got side businesses where they're helping develop and they offer it to ministry leaders at a lesser price, but they're still doing great work. They're doing ministry because they're serving the church from the outside. They're helping churches that can't afford to pay a high-priced designer. And smaller churches can get good quality stuff done without paying a fortune. And so I think any of your listeners out there, if you've got a skill or an ability or an experience, you can use that to pour into other people, which is ministry.
Sure.
But provide an income, because scripture says a man is worthy of his hire. So you deserve to get paid for it. And that was a hard mindset shift. Oof.
Okay.
I still undervalue what I do a lot of times. When people say, "Hey, how much do you charge?" I'm like, I just got asked to speak for a weekend retreat. And the guy's like, "Hey, how much, what's your going rates?" And I'm like, "What'd you pay the last guy?"
Oh.
And I'm like, I'm ashamed to even say that out loud. Wow.
Maybe we could do some coaching right here to help Tom
Yes.
grow his value.
Exactly. And you know what? I was listening. I don't even, I'm sorry, it wasn't your podcast, but it was somebody else's podcast that they talked about figuring out, what your annual income is or whatever, and then dividing that down, and that's your hourly rate kind of thing. And I finally have established some speaking things, and I'm not ashamed to say my coaching costs this.
Yeah.
And I don't apologize for that anymore, because again, if I don't have profit, I don't feel my passion.
That's
I feel like if you've got experience, if you've got a talent, leverage that, because God has given that to you to steward. And so I also think that's a thing, that's a spiritual thing there too, that God has gifted you with something. He's given you something. Even my painful stuff is a gift that I can use to help somebody else walk through the hard season. I can keep them from quitting and walking away from their calling completely because they're sick of the church hurting them.
Yeah.
And that's why I like what you're doing. I think what your passion work and what you're doing to help leaders think about, how do I take what I have and you give it to the master to multiply, and not only take care of yourself and your family, but you're really leveraging something even greater for the kingdom. And I think that's important. We need to start doing more of that. That's the way we're moving, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And so there's a lot of people that are bivocational and are struggling. And it's like, look, you don't need to struggle. This is how God provides. Use the talents and gifts and the experiences you have, leverage them, and get some abundance going in your life, so that you can do more.
Wow. Tom, I have loved this conversation. You have been an awesome guest, and I think that is just a great place to kind of stop. And I think we've given our listeners so many things to think about. And I just believe there's someone listening in this message is exactly what they need to hear. And so I'm grateful that you were willing to come on and share that from your own experiences, and like how you grew up in the church and with your dad as a pastor, and believed certain things, and then realized, okay, that's not the way it has to be, the poverty mentality and all of that. I'd love for people to connect with you. There's probably some that say, I think I need to be coached by Tom. There's probably some children's or student ministry pastors that say, I think we need Tom to come and consult with us or something. Or maybe someone wants to book a Disney vacation or something, and you can be the travel guy. So tell us, what are the best ways for us to find you online or get in touch with you?
Sure. Well, my main website, really the landing site, I'll just say, is tombump.com. TOMBUMP, like a bump in a road, bump on a log. My first son's name is Speed. They'll get that one later. But tombump.com, that has the kind of the landing page for Restoring Leaders, KMC Coach. KMCcoach.net is where the leadership coaching stuff is. Restoring Leaders is the hurt, burnout, overwhelmed stuff. My speaking thing is there as well. So you can contact me through that, or you can just email me at tom@restoringleaders.org. I can talk to you about any of those kind of things through that email. I'm happy to serve. I just tell people, look, I'm a foot washer. That's all I am. I just want to serve leaders. I want to keep serving the King. And if that's what he asked me to do, is help the hurting and the broken, then I'm honored to do that for the rest of my days. And if this is, like I said, if this is my final assignment while I'm here on earth, I'm good with it. I'm excited to do it. And Rich, thank you. Thanks for having me on. And thank you for doing what you do, because I wished I had somebody challenging me to think about being more than a pastor, because again, I think my poverty mindset didn't allow me to think about that for a while, for the longest times. And I hurt myself and hurt my family because I didn't think myself that way. So I'm glad you've got this platform, and I hope that God continues to enlarge it, because I think more pastors need to find you and need your coaching and help. because you've got a lot of wisdom to share. So thanks for having this, and thanks for having me on.
I'm really grateful that Tom took the time to join me on the show today. Wasn't he great? What a story of how God turned a blindside into a blessing and turned Tom's pain into a renewed sense of purpose and mission. I love stories like that, don't you? I don't always love when they happen to me, especially when I'm in those valley moments like Tom talked about. But it's in those valley moments that God does something. He's preparing us. He's teaching us things. We're learning things. We're experiencing things that will shape us for that next season, that mountaintop experience that God has for us. And I really appreciate Tom's perspective on how we can learn, grow, and be refined both through the valleys and the mountains. Hey, do you know another pastor or leader who's going through a valley right now in their life or ministry? Why don't you share this episode with them and let them know that you're thinking of them and that maybe this would be an encouragement for them. And if you want to get in touch with Tom, I've got the links that he shared in the show notes for this episode, and you can find that at morethanapastor.com/52 for episode 52. Well, that's it for today's show. Before we go, would you do me a favor and hit subscribe if you haven't done so already? That way you'll be notified every time a new episode appears. I'm in the rhythm right now of releasing them twice a week on Tuesdays and Fridays. And if you haven't left me a review yet, I would love it if you would just take a couple minutes and do that on Apple Podcasts or whatever platform that you're listening to the show. Leaving a review is a big help. You can share how this has been a help and encouragement to you, and you can share feedback on ways you think the show could be better. I'd appreciate hearing that kind of feedback and for you leaving a review. It also lets others know about the show, and that's a big help as well. Hey, until next time, remember that you are more than a pastor. Saying yes to God's call doesn't mean you have to say yes to feeling stuck, broke, or unfulfilled in your life or ministry. Let's work together and help you create the life, impact, and income that you were made for.